Good afternoon, and welcome to today's webcast titled Using CAST to Develop Implementation Plans that Meet Loading Targets in the Chesapeake Bay Watershed. This webcast is sponsored by EPA's Watershed Academy and EPA's Office of Wetlands, Oceans, and Watersheds, also known as OWOW. I'm Miranda Chen-Hale with EPA's Watershed Academy, and I will be moderating today's webcast. Thank you all for joining us today. We will start by going over a few housekeeping items. First, I would like to briefly summarize some of the features of today's webcast. We hope you will have a lot of questions. Please type your question in the questions box on your control panel and click send. If your control panel is not showing, simply click on the small orange box with the white arrow to expand it. If you have any problems viewing the broadcast, just let us know in the questions box and we will post an answer in that same box. The webcast will be archived for later viewing on EPA's Watershed Academy webcast page at www.epa.gov/watershedacademy. A PDF copy of the slides is also posted on the Watershed Academy website. Participants are eligible to receive a certificate for their attendance at the end of the webcast. Directions for obtaining the certificate will be presented at the conclusion of the presentation. The materials in this webcast have been reviewed by U.S. EPA staff for technical accuracy. However, the views of the speakers and the speakers' organizations are their own and do not necessarily reflect those of U.S. EPA. Mention of commercial enterprises, products, or publications does not mean that U.S. EPA endorses them. Now that we have completed the discussion of the housekeeping items, let's kick off today's webcast. This webcast will demonstrate the capabilities of the Chesapeake Assessment Scenario Tool, also known as CAST, and highlight how the tool is being used by counties, states, watershed groups, and others for total maximum daily loads, TMDLs, nonpoint source pollutant management, and municipal stormwater programs across the Chesapeake Bay Basin. We will also highlight additional lessons learned from developing the online load estimator for local planners that can be applied to watershed programs nationwide. Let me start by introducing our panel of highly esteemed speakers. Today we will hear from Rich Batiuk, who is the Associate Director for Science Analysis and Implementation at the Chesapeake Bay's Program for US EPA in Annapolis, Maryland, and Olivia Devereaux, who is an environmental scientist at Devereaux Environmental Consulting and is the scientific lead in developing CAST. For their full bios, please see the webcast flyer on the Watershed Academy website. Thank you to all of our speakers for joining us today. One final note before we kick off the presentation. We will try to answer as many questions as possible during and near the end of the webcast. However, due to a high number of participants, not all questions will be answered, so please do contact the speaker after the webcast if you still want to follow up. The speaker's contact information is on one of our final slides. And with that, we'll begin our presentation. I will now turn it over to Rich Batiuk to provide an overview of CAST. Rich, the floor is yours. Take it away.
Thanks, Miranda. So welcome to the a virtual view of the Chesapeake Bay Watershed. What you're looking at is a satellite image of the entire Chesapeake Bay Watershed, 64,000 square miles, 6 states in the Washington, D.C. area. Up to your left-hand upper corner is Lake Erie, and then down on your lower left or lower right is the Atlantic Ocean itself out there as well. So what you're seeing here is a largely forested watershed with a significant amount of agriculture. You can see in the light pink to light green colors. And then as we're going to describe, it's home to around 18 million people here in the watershed. On this slide, I want to give you a couple of facts and figures of the watershed to put the context in place for the tool that Olivia is going to describe in more detail here. So here in the mid-Atlantic area, as I mentioned, 64,000 square miles of the watershed, 18 million people. We've actually had since 1985 when the partnership started, that being the Chesapeake Bay Program Partnership, a state, federal, local, academic, business partnership driving the restoration over the last 3 decades. We've actually had a 50% increase in human population since that time period. We're fortunate to be home to about 78,000 mainly family farms, so a heavy emphasis on agriculture here in the mid-Atlantic area, important to state, regional, and local economies. We've got within the tool itself, we do a good accounting for our significant and non-significant municipal and industrial wastewater discharges, and you'll see that in a few minutes when Olivia starts to walk you all through the tools. The Chesapeake itself, though, is around, if you stretch it out along that shoreline, 10,000 miles of shoreline. It's actually longer than the West Coast if you did it from end to end out there. given that it only has 21 feet as the average depth, a very shallow system, and a 15-to-1 ratio in terms of the square area of the watershed itself to the tidal surface waters. Where you live in the watershed really matters on your upstream and downstream neighbors or your uptide and downtide neighbors. So if you're somewhere in the watershed, somebody is likely receiving a little bit of the loads coming off of your property, your watershed area. And then if you're down on the tidal waters, the same thing with tidal exchanges. From tide to tide, you're either an upstream neighbor or downstream neighbor as well. So the importance of the tools that you're going to hear Olivia describe, and I'm going to give you a little bit of context on, is because like any watershed, it's important where you make those load reductions, how you do that, and those local decisions made day to day for land use planning, for development of properties out there, looking at what farmers are going to put in their farm fields out there. Stream restoration efforts really matters in terms of location and making smart, cost-effective decisions. We're fortunate in the Chesapeake Bay watershed to have had a partnership underway for more than 3 decades now. We started in 1983 with the first Chesapeake Bay watershed agreement, and we've written a series of agreements since then to really guide the restoration of not only the estuary itself, but the surrounding watershed as well. On this slide, you can see, actually taking a step back, and you're seeing a 50-year history of activities on the Chesapeake Bay area itself, looking at starting with understanding some of the issues out in there that were impacting the Chesapeake, and then moving through, as you can see highlighted in bold blue there, an 83 agreement, 1987, 2000, and 2014 agreement. Backed up within there as well, and is a description of as we've been working towards reducing the amount of nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment pollution coming off of our farm fields, our backyards, off of our city streets, our towns, into the Chesapeake. We've also been working through a series of agreements that got increasingly more specific in terms of recognizing who's got responsibility for what, centered at the state scale, and then them working with local partners across their respective portions of the watershed as well. But a long history of not only using agreements, but using the types of tools, decision support tools, as Olivia and I will describe here, to help make very complicated decisions across 6 different states, the District of Columbia, thousands of local municipalities that themselves have responsibility for working with their local citizens, and then hundreds and thousands and millions of homeowners, 78,000 farmers across the Chesapeake Bay watershed. But at the same time, we're fortunate again as a partnership, and when I refer to we, I'm really describing the partnership and the voice in which we try to work collectively across there. We've got, I think, a pretty good sense of a shared vision. It goes well beyond just water quality, dealing with cultural heritage here in the Mid-Atlantic, getting diversity of stakeholders involved in there, looking at issues on the land itself, land conservation issues, education, as well as in the estuary. But I think one of the things that has tied us together is using shared tools, using shared science and information in order to make collaborative decisions to then head towards this vision that you see up on your screen right here. One of the key things, one of the key hallmarks of the Chesapeake Bay Program Partnership really over its 3-decade history, and that is setting very specific and where possible numeric goals that can be reported publicly, that can be tracked using science, using monitoring and other tools out there over time, and then holding, whether it's the fishing community, whether it's a municipal authority community out there, stormwater, folks that are conserving land, to making their progress against their sets of goals that are numeric, and then, again, as I said, shared with the public, and then updated as we get new information over time. And then that new information gets into and has been the basis for our series of agreements, again, starting back in 1983, and then heading all the way to 2014, more recently with the latest Chesapeake Bay Watershed Agreement that was signed by, in this case, it's signed by the 6 governors of the states, the mayor of the District of Columbia, the EPA administrator, and the chair of the Chesapeake Bay Commission, a tri-state legislative commission as well. But that focus on setting and tracking numerical goals, that accountability, is one of the reasons why the partnership developed this tool that Olivia is going to describe, and the importance of it in taking decision-making and providing tools to our local partners, to our regional partners, state, federal partners out there, and allowing them to make better decisions within their area of responsibility, again, working with their upstream neighbors and their downstream neighbors as well. But before getting into that, I want to give you a little snapshot of the progress that we've made to date in here, and again, how these decision-making support tools have come into play here. What you're seeing on the screen in front of you, on your left-hand side, that's at about 114 stations that make up essentially a watershed-wide, partnership-wide monitoring program of where we look at storm event samples as well as base flow samples, and we analyze them for constituents like nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment consistently across the 6-state watershed. And we look at long-term trends using U.S. Geological Survey techniques that allow us to essentially look at the trend and remove the effective river flow as well. And what you're seeing there is just for nitrogen in the last decade or so, and those downward pointing arrows are indicating that our USGS partners and the scientists there are indicating that there's a statistically significant trend over that time period. And the colors themselves give us more information about the yield, the amount of nitrogen and phosphorus coming off that watershed per acre. If you look on the right-hand side, that's an example of where our estuarine monitoring comes to play, where we've got state and universities that have been monitoring the Chesapeake at about 160 stations for the past 3 decades. The fact that we can actually see at a decadal scale over the 30 years that we've been monitoring there, those downward green pointing arrows mean that there's a statistically significant, over the last decade, change in the concentration of nitrogen that we're seeing in that large water body out there. That means farmers, homeowners, people working on stream restoration, folks working on land conservation out there. There's been a lot of effort out there to turn the Chesapeake around from increasing nitrogen loads, increasing nitrogen concentrations, to essentially across all the tidal waters to see those kind of trends over time. We would have not gotten there without the kind of tools that Olivia is going to show you, and that is, again, tools that combine a tremendous amount of land grant science and USGS and local community college information, as well as from our conservation districts, from our municipalities, and allow us to pose what-if questions based on the best shared level of information across the watershed. Here's another example of long-term trends, again, being guided by numerical goals out there that have accountability, but then the trust of, if I make reductions at my wastewater treatment plant, if I'm in Warfield, West Virginia, several hundred miles from the tidal Potomac, is that going to have a difference in my local water quality? And is it going to benefit the people around Washington, D.C. who get their drinking water and recreate in that particular area? What you're seeing here is essentially a 3-decade chart that combines up all the industrial and municipal, significant, large facilities, as well as very small facilities, and what their total nitrogen delivered to the Chesapeake Bay and to the edge of the stream is. And that line in a slight gray pattern across that graphic is actually the increasing municipal flow because of human population. Our 470 plus significant municipal and industrial facilities not only made tremendous amount of reductions, again, building off the science and the tools that Olivia is going to describe, but they also achieved their collective goal a decade early than what the partnership had set for them. We had originally set they needed to get these things done by 2025. By 2015, they had actually exceeded their contribution, along with what the expectations are from our farming community, from our homeowners out there, from folks that operate municipal stormwater management systems out there, as well as others looking at other lands. The municipal and industrial community used the technologies and made that happen. But again, one of the drivers for that was the tools that we're describing here, the collaborative decision-making process, and the confidence that we make these reductions and we're going to benefit local streams and rivers, and we're going to benefit the Chesapeake Bay estuary well downstream from them as well. Another component, again, that gets factored into the type of tools that we're going to be describing here is capturing air pollution. In this case, what you're seeing is in the left-hand side, that area in sort of a light yellow color, that's actually the 710,000 square mile airshed that about 75% of the atmospheric deposition loads that end up in the Chesapeake Bay watershed come from that area, which includes 3 Canadian provinces, as well as about 17 states here in the United States. What you're seeing on the right is essentially a decadal scale trend in terms of the amount of nitrate that's deposited in the eastern portion of the United States, and the areas in red are illustrating much higher concentrations that were measured over time. That change from that red color to a tannish color to even to the light green back there indicates significant reductions in the amount of air pollution coming into the mid-Atlantic area and from the watershed and the airshed that surrounds the Chesapeake Bay watershed itself. So we've been capturing the benefits from that again in these sets of tools. Some of the kind of outputs that Olivia is going to illustrate for you allows us, in recognizing it as modeled output, it's some of the best science that we've got in here, and we back it up by monitoring, as I showed you earlier. It allows you to then, in this case, look across the entire Chesapeake Bay watershed and accounting for all the thousands and thousands of conservation practices, stormwater practices, stream miles miles of streams that have been restored out there, cover crops, upgrades of wastewater treatment facilities. We can then estimate over time what we think the delivered load to the Chesapeake is, and we can also put it by the different source categories that you see here as well. So if you see that red category, that shows that a tremendous amount of reduction from the wastewater community. The area in blue right near the bottom indicates that our farming community has put a tremendous amount of time and effort and a lot of their own money in addition to state and federal cost share to reduce the amount of, in this case, nitrogen running off from their agricultural production areas. Do we have still more to go? Most definitely. But in this particular graphic, it indicates that we've made a tremendous amount of progress. We're also able to not point fingers, but to indicate in this graphic where our different state partners are and where we need to put our emphasis in terms of all of us getting to, by 2025, having practices on the ground that are going to reduce the right amount of nitrogen and phosphorus and sediment to meet Maryland, Virginia, DC, and Delaware's water quality standards in the Chesapeake Bay itself. So it allows us to measure progress, to hold our partners accountable, but most importantly, to help those partners and their local partners put the practices on the ground in the places that make most sense for their local streams and rivers, but also for the collective effort of restoring the Chesapeake Bay and its tidal tributaries. Here's the same kind of graphic in phosphorus. Again, you can see a large reduction in the red, which is the wastewater reductions that have happened over time that reflect the graphic that I showed you earlier. In blue, again, by 2017, a significant amount of reduction from phosphorus through different management actions by our 78,000 farms out there as well. And we're actually starting to turn the tide in that yellow section, that being urban stormwater, and starting to get ahead of the curve where we've had, as I said earlier, about a 50% increase in human population since 1985 to current out there. We've got now good engineers out there, planners that are figuring out how to hold back those flows, that nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment. And the tool that Olivia is going to describe for you is actually being used by our local partners to make smarter and smarter stormwater management decisions for their own local neighborhoods, for their watersheds, and also for their part in the Chesapeake Bay restoration. And then finally, this is essentially a snapshot of not only monitoring data, but a small amount of modeling output for the coastal plain within the Chesapeake Bay watershed. But what it illustrates is those histogram bars going up and down is our best estimate of the total amount of nitrogen that's actually reaching the Chesapeake Bay itself from the entire watershed and from the airshed. But what you see is for those first 2 decades or so, that thin blue bar, which is then showing river flow, the river flow, as it goes up, the loads go up. As the river flow goes down, the loads go down as well. If you look closely in the last 10 years, since around 2005 to 2015, we're seeing a separation between those two. In other words, more river flow doesn't immediately end up as more pollution coming into the Chesapeake. Our models are saying the same thing. Our monitoring data is demonstrating that as well. And we want to build off of that progress with the tool that Olivia is going to describe to then, at a more local scale, at a more regional scale, help our local, state, and federal partners, our private partners, continue to make better decisions on their lands for their own purposes that collectively are turning an entire watershed around and providing lots of clean water and turning an estuarine ecosystem around as well, based on these trends that you're seeing. And then finally, one of our key things that we share with the Gulf of Mexico and others out there is a large part of the Chesapeake Bay in the deeper waters actually turn what we call anoxic, has a complete absence of oxygen. Our scientists have indicated over the last 30 plus years, more recently they're seeing a long-term trend that we're actually not only holding the line with the additional people, we're actually making progress. So the work by our farmers, by our municipal authorities, by our stormwater folks out there, by private watershed groups are making a visible difference out there. Are we there yet? No. but are we seeing clear signs of the tools, the information, the collaborative decision-making has been working? Most definitely, and again, here's one more example of that in one of the most toughest places to do it, and that is in the deeper parts of the Chesapeake. But as that comes back, the rest of the system is going to actually restore a lot faster as well. And then finally, here's an example from down in the lower James, or in the James River between Richmond, Virginia, to the mouth of the Chesapeake, where 20, 30 years ago, the James was completely devoid, in this case, of underwater grasses, critical to supporting crabs and weakfish and other things that are commercially and recreationally harvested. They have not only come back, but they're approaching their restoration goal, which is actually embedded into Maryland, into Virginia's water quality standards themselves. Again, our Virginian colleagues, like others, have been using these tools to help guide regional, state, and local decisions that have made a difference in terms of the farming community, the urban and suburban communities, the wastewater facilities in the lower James, and they're now benefiting directly from these improvements of water quality from a commercial, economic, and just from an aesthetic perspective as well down in the James River. Then finally, when I refer to we, it's this large infrastructure or management structure within the Chesapeake Bay Program Partnership, starting at the Executive Council, where there are governors, the mayor, the EPA administrator, to a series of goal implementation teams, to a series of work groups underneath that as well. The reason I put that up there is my last set of slides, I'm just going to show you how many folks were involved in making the kind of shared decisions that developed the tool that Olivia is going to describe as well. If you add up all the individuals that are part of these different work groups, it's over 800 individuals, from federal partners to state partners to advocacy to agribusiness to local citizens to our academic partners as well. Everybody's at the table. They have opportunities to be part of this collective collaborative decision making, and the type of tools that I'm describing would not have been possible without the contributions, the decision making by hundreds and hundreds of partners. And the tool that Olivia is going to describe is actually what we call our CAST tool, is actually a part of a suite of tools that the Chesapeake Bay Program Partnership uses to inform, not to make, but to inform shared and collaborative decision making, and to empower our state, federal, local, private partners to use shared information for their own particular purposes to make decisions that they need to make for business, for other development considerations, for planning decisions, whatever it might be the case in there. They are welcome to use these tools, and they understand the history and the support that went behind them as well. But again, there's a shared set of tools, and then we've used CAST and other tools to develop the Chesapeake Bay TMDL, but more importantly, to support our state, local, and federal, and other partners to develop more specific implementation strategies, where to put these practices, where to put them on the land for the most cost-effective and pollutant reduction efficient changes over time. And the CAST plays a central role directly, as Olivia is going to describe for you, in helping our local and state partners in their planning and decision making, but it also feeds into the partnership and allows us to run other models and to make decisions of, are we going to meet Chesapeake Bay water quality standards to bring back what we need for crabs, rockfish, oysters by taking these decisions and our partners making these commitments over time as well. So it's an integral part of a much larger suite of tools, but is the one that actually is online, and we now have hundreds and hundreds of users that are using this tool, using the science that's really been collected by the partnership over the past decade as well. And then finally, one of the challenges we've had, and others I know have out there as well, when you're modeling watersheds, when you're developing tools that draw a tremendous amount of science, we've always been challenged to always improve that, bring in the new science, but also keep it simple. So if we talk to our managers, they want us to always improve, but don't change the numbers because that makes it more difficult for them to sell it to their policymakers, to the public. And they want to keep it simple, but they want to be sure that you're capturing everything, all the cropping patterns out there, all the ways that we can bioinfiltrate wastewater, stormwater flows out there as well. So we've got that conundrum between these two elements. And then we certainly listen to our scientific community. They always want us to improve, but they want us to use their research. They want us to keep it simple, but they want us to use multiple models as well. Well, we figured out a way to actually get there, and that is in the 6th version of the Chesapeake Bay Program's Partnership's Watershed model that actually dates back into the late 1970s. we approached it from a much more simpler version of our models. In the past, we've had a lot more complex ones, but by going simpler, it allowed the development of the CAS tool that Livia is going to describe for you. But it also allowed us to listen to our scientific community and include multiple models, ones that have been developed by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, ones that have been developed by USDA, to then get information from our poultry industry out there, to get information from our counties in terms of zoning and planning. It allows us to draw together a tremendous amount of information, but by keeping it simple, it also allowed us to develop a tool that folks can, online, with a small amount of training, be able to develop scenarios and actually come up with the exact same results that as we run the larger Chesapeake Bay watershed model, we're able to get that information too as well. And then finally, we calibrate this model in our full suite of models with decades worth of monitoring data. What you're seeing here is the difference between our phase 5 to phase 6. By phase 6, we added another decade onto our set of data that we calibrated. So we look over actually 3 decades at hundreds of stations across the watershed, and in some cases to have a length of monitoring record that goes back for decades. We also underlaid this model with a high-resolution land cover for the entire 64,000 square miles of the Chesapeake Bay watershed. We now have mapped end-to-end 1-meter resolution land cover that has then been mapped into land use, and that becomes a basis for the model and the tool that Olivia is going to describe as well. That was a heck of an undertaking, particularly for a 64,000 square mile area, but it also allowed us to have more confidence of where those impervious surfaces are, where our farm community actually has trees bordering along streams and rivers out there, where are the important places that we need to protect and put these in place as well out there. And we can direct you to a lot of information in terms of calibration using the modeling data, the calibration of the models themselves using decades worth of monitoring data, station by station out there as well. And it gives you the ability, and our partners and our stakeholders, the ability during that development of that model to actually have checked on their streams and rivers. Are we actually getting the matching up with the monitoring data over time? And to produce results like that, where it's tough to see what's the difference between the model output and the monitor data, which in this case is in blue, and the model simulated is in red. We continue to double check this again. This is USGS estimated loads for the entire Susquehanna River over a 3-decade time period as well. Again, models are not perfect, but we get increased confidence because of the kind of factors that I showed you up on this screen. In terms of partners developing it in tandem with each other, using expert panels to develop BMP efficiencies. In other words, what is the reductions if we put this practice in place? That we have partners looking at beta versions of it to understand what's underneath the hood, that they're comfortable about it, as well as asking independent peer review scientists from around the country to take a look at our work and provide us feedback, and then finish off with our cabinet level secretaries actually signing off on these models for shared management applications across the way as well out there. And then finishing up, I want to go back to that management structure that I showed for the Chesapeake Bay program. The areas that are the groups that you see circled here, these are the people from citizens to our scientific advisors, to our cabinet level secretaries, to folks that are working on very technical issues in terms of different source sectors, as well as monitoring data. These are the individuals, hundreds and hundreds of them, that were making the decisions that built the type of tool that Olivia is going to describe for you in a moment here. So I'm going to stop at that particular point and to see if there's any other questions before I turn it over to Olivia to then take you into the CAS tool itself.
Thank you, Rich. Yeah, so again, if you have any questions for Rich on this introduction, please feel free to submit them into the chat box. We have one about nitrogen reduction load by 2025. I don't know if you could go back to that slide, Rich, and just explain a little bit more about what's going on in Pennsylvania and some of the other states.
Yeah, so I won't try to slip back to the slide, but what we did is through the process, and if we had more time, we could describe it as the partnership agreed to an equitable way of allocating responsibility for making nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment load allocations among the 6 states and the District of Columbia. So the partnership agreed to, by state, by major river basin. So for Pennsylvania, for example, Pennsylvania got a load reduction or a cap load allocation for its part of the Susquehanna River and part of the Potomac River. And at that point, the states then went through and developed what we call watershed implementation plans, and they committed to, through a 2-year milestone process, here's what they were going to bite off in terms of bite-sized chunks every year in order to reduce their part of the overall reductions under the TMDL. Pennsylvania has been challenged because they have a huge part of the watershed. They have a large, important farming community out there, and the fact that they're at the head of the waters, of the tidal waters themselves, but they actually don't have tidal waters. They were at a bit of a disadvantage of, because they get cleaner water in their streams and rivers, but Maryland, Virginia downstream benefit directly from their economies to what's happening there. So Pennsylvania's had some big challenges, reaching out to, I think, about 35,000 mainly family farms out there, as well as their stormwater challenges in terms of their small areas out there at times. So yes, our Pennsylvania colleagues have got big challenges. The type of tools that Olivia is going to be describing here, we're actually working with their local stakeholders and partners to determine how to focus in on their local streams and rivers. They've got thousands of miles of impaired streams, and how that can help them actually catch up and get on the right trajectory for meeting not only their local streams and rivers, where they got sources of drinking water and recreation, but also their contribution to downstream Chesapeake Bay waters as well. We can direct folks to more information on the TMDL so you can see actually how we applied the tools that we're describing in that process as well. And it looked like there was another question in terms of define family farms, please. In that case, I think our average size of some of our farms, particularly in Pennsylvania and the Shenandoah, are something around 150 to 200 acres. They tend to have some row crops in there. They might have a small herd in there as well. I refer to that mainly because the physical size of them, they're important for local economies, and also to work with those farmers means that we have to have boots out on the ground with cost share funding and technical expertise, and how we target through the type of tools that Olivia is describing, not in terms of individual farms, but how to work with those farmers and how to provide good advice through their conservation district, through the people that they trust, is that we're fortunate in the Bay region, again, to have a lot of small family farms, but it makes a big challenge to our states, to our conservation districts, to our land-grant universities to provide the expertise out there. We're trying to provide additional tools to those service providers so they can help those family farms make good decisions for their production, but also protect their local sources from drinking water, their local streams and rivers as well. So hence the reason on emphasizing sort of the physical size of it is because of the challenge and the opportunity that it provides here in the Mid-Atlantic region itself.
Thanks. I think we have time for one more question. There was a question about TP load increasing from 2016 to 2017. Would you mind just going over that graph again? I think it was the one right after the nitrogen load reduction by 2025. Okay. Yeah, the point is that what we call progress runs. In other words, every time that a state near the end of the year, they're going to submit to the Chesapeake Bay Program Partnership Office here in Annapolis a listing of here's all the practices in the agricultural sector, urban stormwater sector, upgrades of wastewater treatment plants, miles of stream restoration, and then we run that through the partnership's watershed model, and it gives us an output of delivered loads to local streams and also delivered load to the Chesapeake. And sometimes, as you see on this graphic, there might be a slight uptick in that. Some of those occur because our state partners are continuously going back and looking at their history of practices, making adjustments to be sure that we've got the best set of them. There's also changes in terms of cost share programs that are out there, whether it's a state, federal, or local, that reverberates itself in there as well. So we're going to see some year-to-year ups and downs in there. It really reflects the quality of the information that our 6 state partners and district partners through their conservation districts or through organizations like Ducks Unlimited, Trout Unlimited, and others that are providing private and other public dollars in there that reverberates up and down. We certainly work closely with each state, understand where they might be running up into challenges in terms of fiscally and funding-wise, and to help them look at their next 2-year milestone, try to overcome those and continue down there as well. But that's an important piece, that the partnership, again, not in a negative gotcha moment, but let's understand what the challenges each of our state and local partners are running into, and how can the partnership help them turn the corner a little bit, improve their local streams and rivers, and then help contribute to the restoration of the Chesapeake as well down there. It's these tools that allow you to account, track for things, but I think at the end, help your partners,
help your neighbors make better decisions and understand what they can do more effectively and efficiently on their land area within their watershed itself. I think at this point I'm going to turn over to Olivia and let her walk you through this tool that I've been describing of how the partnership has worked over time.
Thanks, Rich. I appreciate that. I want to turn now to CAST and show you how this tool works. This is the Chesapeake Assessment Scenario Tool. It was developed originally in 2011. We have just updated it to have the latest version of the model, the Phase 6 model, available through CAST. It is at cast.chesapeakebay.net. That is the URL, the website address for this Phase 6 version of CAST. I want to take a few minutes to kind of go over how this can be used and the kinds of questions you can ask of CAST and get answers for. This was originally developed when the Bay TMDL came into existence in 2010, and the states were developing plans. And as they took those plans to a local level, to counties, to the MS4s, they wanted some more information about how to do planning and to get a better understanding of the Bay program partnership model. And to do that, they really needed to be able to run scenarios and see how it worked. So CAST was developed to make sure that there was full transparency. It's one thing to email somebody a spreadsheet of data and to, go through presentations and explain. It's a whole other thing to then say, here, you try it, you run the model, you get the results, let's do this together. So that's where, when we developed CAST and made it available to everybody in the Chesapeake Bay watershed, including state governments as well as down to local planners and research institutions, anybody can use it. It's online, free and available to everybody. And it did come about in 2011, and now we're moving into this Phase 6 version where it's online and available with this Phase 6 version that Rich has gone over. So let me go through a couple of sort of use cases. The first question that people often ask is, what is the impact of land use development over time? And it's easy to do that. There's a menu bar at the top here, and even without getting a login, I am not logged in right now, you can go to Public Reports, look at the maps, and then just take a look here at this map for where we were in 1985, the progress we had made then for nitrogen. I'll scroll out. We can see where we are for nitrogen at the edge of stream scale. And then we can look at where we are with the plans that the states developed for the Phase 2 watershed implementation plans. And just, looking at the entire Chesapeake Bay watershed, you can see that in 1985, there were a lot of these dark areas where the load was pretty high. And then for the plans showing that there are a lot less dark areas, the loads are going down. It is still, there's some places in Pennsylvania and a little bit in the Shenandoah Valley where there are a lot of animals. You can see where the loads are still high and there's still more work to be done. But there's been a lot of progress over these years in terms of where we were in 1985 and where we're planning to be in 2025 with those watershed implementation plans. You could also just compare it to where we are in, say, 2013, and this is just looking at nitrogen. And you can see that, there's some differences here. There's still some places where we've got some higher loads, but we've got some improvements in various places, especially you can see down here, there are some changes where there's been some reductions in the loads. So you can do that from the maps, from the home page, just going to Public Reports and Maps and see the difference in terms of the planning and look at the land over time. I'm going to show you in more detail how you can drill into that once you log in, but that's one question people ask. Another question people ask is about what is the effect of different BMPs on loads? And you can certainly look at that by going to these reports, and you can select a report of getting a BMP summary report and just naming this report, and you can get a report for, BMP summary for, various things. And for looking at a no action, I'll select some scenarios here. There's a drop-down list of all these scenarios that are already run and made public, and these are at the scale of the entire Chesapeake Bay watershed, and you can drill in and look at the details. And we can just select several here. So you could look at no action with no BMPs, and look at that on a 2025 land use. You could look at it with the WIP, also on the same land use. That WIP is Watershed Implementation Plan. And these all have allocation error. That's the atmospheric deposition that's expected to occur with current regulations in place. And then we can look at it with what we call E3, everything, everywhere, by everyone. So that would be the maximum amount that we would expect is even possible. And we'll keep that land use the same for all three. We've got 2025 land use for those three scenarios. And you can just download that report and take a look at it. So if we go and open that, then it opens to a README page to give you a little more information. You can check those scenario details in case you forgot what you selected. It's here. We've got that information. And then you can look at the summary BMPs. At the top, we start with agricultural practices. And if we scroll over, we've got the amount of acres for the District of Columbia, and we've got it for all three scenarios. And scrolling over, we've got percent implementation. And we've got all of the 7 major jurisdictions in here going across the spreadsheet. So you can get this BMP implementation levels in here, and we go through all of these ag BMPs, and then we go into the urban and suburban practices, and there are dozens of practices that are available for states to implement and report. These data come from what people have reported, what the states have reported from various sources. So Rich mentioned some. It comes from the NRCS cost share. It comes from state cost share for agriculture. It comes from urban homeowners. It comes from MS4 reporting. It comes from all different sources that the states are reporting. And this is all implementation that is done and is being reported. So we've got this summed up, and you can go down and just see all of the different practices and the level of implementation in the various jurisdictions simply by going to public reports and downloading a report. You can put any scenario in there that you want. I'm going to go back to the home page and show you that another question people ask is, what are the geographic locations where BMPs will reduce the most load? And you can look at that too. When you download a public report, we already looked at the BMP summary report. You could also look at a loads report and download a loads report. So we can just name this, loads report and select a geographic scale. And you could do this for all of the states. And I picked here the state, the area in the Chesapeake Bay watershed. Some of the states are not fully in the Chesapeake Bay watershed. And then again, select scenarios. I'm going to go ahead and select the same scenario as I did before, which was that 2025 no action, the 2025 plan, and those are the voluntary plans that the states put together and provide to the Chesapeake Bay program so that we can have plans for the entire watershed. And then the one that looks at everything, everywhere, by everyone, or E3, that is also something that is determined by the entire partnership. So those 800 plus people that Rich talked about in the whole Chesapeake Bay program partnership structure, he showed that diagram of all of those goal teams and work groups. All of those people have worked together to say what is possible with our plans, with our everyone by everything, everything by everyone, everywhere, E3, and that is what people have said is possible. So this was not something that was decided top down. This is something that the entire partnership has worked to develop. And these are the scenarios. And this tool brings them together so that there's full transparency. The information is available to anyone who wants to look at it, even without logging in. So we can download this in a couple of different aggregations and download that report. It downloads as an Excel file. And I'm going to go ahead and open that load summary report. It also comes with a README and the details about the 3 scenarios. And if I look at it with all the information summed up, I can see that there's a comparison of the acres between those scenarios. And then I can go over and look at the nitrogen loads from each of those states for the WIP, for the no action, and for the E3. So as we would expect, if you do all of these scenarios, the E3 is going to be the one with the lowest load here. So just looking at Delaware, You can see that with no BMPs in 2025 for Delaware, there are 13 million pounds delivered to the edge of a stream. But with all the BMPs, best management practices that are possible, they're down to 4,000. And you can see similar reductions in all of these jurisdictions. And we have it for nitrogen and phosphorus and for sediment. You'll see that we have it for edge of stream for all of these scenarios, and we also have it for EOT, that means edge of tide. So all of those factors that occur in the streams to reduce the loads, denitrification, that is occurring, and so we show it both for the edge of stream, which is really important for the local jurisdictions, especially when you get up into New York and West Virginia, and they're not so focused on what's going on in the Chesapeake Bay because, you know, they're not out there in the water on the bay, so they want to know what's happening at the edge of stream, but we're looking also at the edge of the tidal waters of the bay, so you can see that information at edge of tide, or EOT is the abbreviation. So that's all available here. Again, public reports and maps, you know, and that's from the CAST homepage. So those are a couple of things people ask. They want to know the change in loads due to land use development. They want to know the effect of different BMPs. They want to know the geographic locations. I just showed it to you by state. You can also look at it by county or by a hydrologic unit code. There are a lot of different ways to look at it. If you log in, the options are a little more limited from the home page. Let me shift now and show you that when you have local planners, there's all this additional information here. Local planners will often say, where do I start? I'm not a modeler. I don't understand models. I need to know, where do I start? And if we click on this information about developing a plan, we can see that there are approaches to developing watershed plans. This is a place to start. It is a suggestion for a framework for how you can think about this. So here are some steps for developing a plan. This is a diagram. If you scroll down through this page, there's a whole lot more information that kind of walks you through, what do I do first? How am I going to get some agreement on what should be in a plan? Where do I go from here? So let me take a minute to walk through this. The place that most people start is with programmatic goals. They're going to have an idea that, well, hey, we have zoning. We know we can't develop in some of these areas. We know we're going to focus development in other areas. Let's look at our zoning. They may say we've got an option to put a large lot development policy in place. We're going to develop these large areas that previously were agriculture, previously were forest, and we're going to put large houses there. What is going to be the implication? And the idea is that you take some of these programmatic goals, and they could be thoughts, they're not in place yet, and say, well, what is that going to mean? What is it going to mean in terms of your nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment loads? What is it going to mean in terms of co-benefits? And what is it going to mean in terms of costs? And cost is a big one. So we have information on all of that. While we primarily show the load information, because we're focused on nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment, and we show that, we also have the co-benefits. By co-benefits, I mean things like biodiversity, or brook trout, or fish passage, or air quality. There are almost 30 management strategies that the Chesapeake Bay Program Partnership has developed, and each of those has a co-benefit attached to it. Each of those management strategies has a rating that says what the benefit of doing any of the BMPs that we model is for in terms of those 30 management strategies. So if you want to implement increased forest canopy in a city, then we can tell you what is the impact on air quality, what is the impact on brook trout, what is the impact on biodiversity, and that is something worth considering. It may be that if you're a planner, your county commissioners may be less interested in the nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment, but they may be very interested in recreational activities and what's going to be available. And so it's important to say, well, we can reduce the nitrogen and phosphorus at the same time as increasing recreational opportunities, at the same time as increasing brook trout or black duck habitat, or any one of those almost 30 management strategies. And we also show you the cost. There have been costs that are developed associated with each BMP, and that information is available through CAST, and you can see the costs of implementing the BMPs and of doing an entire scenario full of BMPs. You can see what the cost is. Now those costs are specific to each state. So they may not be right if you're going from the far western part of the state to the far eastern part. There may be some adjustment needed. We have one number for the entire state, but that's okay. You can go in there and edit that cost to make it appropriate for your local jurisdiction. But we give you a starting point. And those costs are developed in terms of the in terms of the capital cost, the cost it takes to implement a practice, in terms of the operations and management, and also in terms of the opportunity cost. And then there's an annual average cost that's associated with all of with each of the BMPs. So these are three factors to consider. So when you have these multi-objective planning, we need to provide information, and we do provide information on each of these categories of objectives. So when you have this programmatic goal, like say a large lot development or zoning, you need to consider these multiple objectives, translate it to BMPs. Maybe what you're going to do is say that with large lot development, some percent, 10% maybe should be set aside to have some sort of, tree canopy. That's a BMP. So you translate to the BMP of tree canopy. And then the next step is to just run that scenario and cast with those so many acres of tree canopy in there and determine if your numeric reductions achieve the numeric goals. So does the load reduction for nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment achieve the goal that you have set for your nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment? Are you achieving the goals that you have for those co-benefits? And are you staying within the cost parameters that you've outlined for yourself as being your objective? If not, that's okay. It's an iterative process. Go back, revise that programmatic goal and say, well, we've got large lot development. That's not getting us where we need to be. Maybe we should increase the amount of the lot that must, have some trees planted on it. Or maybe we're going to look at some other programmatic goal and do something in addition to that. And so you can go back through that process until you do achieve your program, your numeric goal, and then you're done with your plan and you've hit that green box and you can check it off and say, yes, we have achieved the load reduction that was our goal. We have accomplished the co-benefits that we prioritized, and we know what those costs are, and we're going to work toward achieving all of these things within the cost available. So these are the steps to developing a plan. We put this here so that people know what the starting point is, and so they can have a framework. I often think of it a little bit as a closet. You build a closet. You got to get the hangers in the closet before you can hang up the clothes. These are the hangers that you're going to use to hang up your clothes. So once you get this framework in your mind, then you can go back and run some scenarios and cast. To do that, you won't just need to know how to develop a plan, but you'll need to understand some of the terminology. I wish we could skip this step, but we've not figured out how to do that. But here we have the information for all of the load sources. That would be our land uses and other sources like wastewater and even animals that are alongside a stream. And so those are our load source definitions. We have our BMP definitions. You really need to get a good understanding of what those are before you start to use CAST. So there's a terminology that needs to be understood. Clicking here downloads a table with all of that information. I downloaded it before the webinar, and you can see that we just have a list of all these load sources, and then the definition is over here, a short definition to help you understand. A list of all the BMPs. You can see in here we have so many different options. Even just for cover crops, there are almost 100 different kinds of cover crops. And you can scroll through and see that for manure transport, there are so many different options for manure transport and manure technology. Manure treatment technology. There are a lot of different kinds of BMPs, whether it's for agriculture or the developed sector, and even some of those that have to do with stream and shoreline BMPs like oyster aquaculture. So there are lots of options for BMPs, and getting a good understanding of those definitions is important. And we put it here all in one table with lots of different tabs to help people get it all in one place to understand. So that's here downloaded from the Phase 6 source data, and you can get that table so you can get a good understanding of what the terminology is. We certainly want it to all be transparent, but we do ask that you take a moment to understand the terminology so we're all on the same page. There's more detailed documentation under the BMP documentation. For agriculture, there's a lot more detailed information about manure and crop and turf grass and where we got that source data. That was all developed through the partnership structure with hundreds of people having input. More documentation and information, for those of you who want to get into kind of the background of all of this, is available under model documentation and the inputs to the calibration. So that is available here. I'm not going to click through that, but all of that information is available. We also have other information available on this page. I encourage you to explore at your own, on your own time, because I really want to focus on showing you how to use scenarios. I will mention that the model, and Rich went over this, the model is calibrated to all of those monitoring stations to see more information on the trends. Some of those slides he showed were taken from this river trends information. This monitoring information of what is actually measured in the streams is the anchor for everything we model. So it's important to see the monitoring information to understand what's going on. So we put that here as part of CAST so that you can link to that and easily see it. So let's log in. It's easy to create a login. I've already done that. If you haven't, you can just click on the register button. If you're having trouble, you'll see these little video camera throughout the website, and you can watch a short, they're between 1 and 3 minutes for how to, and they're wonderfully done videos that you can watch online to help you. You'll see here I logged in, and it takes you to the scenarios page. There's a video camera here that'll tell you where do you start. So if you're not sure where to start, that would be a good place to click. And there's also view documentation on every page, and it'll jump you right to information about this page, and that should be helpful. This is the kind of your page once you log in that will show you what scenarios you can create and what you can look at. And I just want to emphasize again, anybody can get a login. It doesn't matter where in the world you are. You can be from India and you can also log in. We have users in New Zealand. We have users all over the world. These are people who are very interested in the Chesapeake Bay, so they have created logins and are using the tool as well. It's not just for our local jurisdictions, although we certainly want to cater to the local jurisdictions because that's where the implementation is occurring, but we want people from all over the world to be able to use CAST. So I have scenarios that I've created at different times, and they're listed here. These are all scenarios I've created. There are also shared scenarios. When you first log in, you will just see the ones that are shared with you, and they're all listed here. So I have filtered my list so you can see all the ones that are shared by CBP admin. That's the Chesapeake Bay Program Administrator. So those are the official scenarios. We saw that list when we were on the home page and looking at the maps and looking at those reports. This is the Chesapeake Bay-wide scenarios that are official scenarios that are run and available to everybody. It draws on the data provided by each of the states and that were determined by the Bay Program Partnership. So if we want to look at the impact of land use development over time, we could say, well, these scenarios already exist, let's use these. And if I just look at this top menu bar, I can see results, and I can go to compare scenarios. And I can select to compare, and maybe I want to focus in on a particular county. So I can select New York, so we're going to the top of the watershed, and I'll select Chemung County, New York. We have agencies. This is to allow our federal partners to be able to focus in on just the areas that apply to them. So in Chemung County, the Department of Defense has a facility. There are a few smaller facilities. If you were doing this in Washington, D.C., this list would be a lot longer. You would see everything from the Smithsonian to the Department of Defense to Fish and Wildlife, a whole list of a dozen or so federal agencies. I'm going to pick all agencies. That includes federal and non-federal. I can select scenarios. If I want to see what's going on between, say, 2013 and compare that to what's going on in 2025, I can do that. I'm going to pick 2013 BMPs, and I'm also going to pick the 2013 scenario with the 2013 BMPs. That's on the 2013 land use. And I'm going to pick 2025. This was the Phase 2 Watershed Implementation Plan, and I could pick other scenarios, but I'll stick to just those two. And I can click Compare, and it takes you to show you what the cost is and the acres, and we'll dig into that a little bit more. Of course, the Phase 2 WIP is going to have more BMPs, so the cost goes up, and we could expand this and look at the difference in acres. The total will remain the same. The county hasn't changed shape, but the amount is moving from maybe less agriculture, a little bit more developed land, and you can see that the natural land, that would be the amount that's moved into forest, has gone up. And then clicking on these arrows allows you to expand so you can see all the different load source categories in the detail, so you could drill into that a little bit more. What I want to see right now is the difference in loads. So I'm going to look at this load compare result, and I've got it for nitrogen, and scrolling down I can see phosphorus and sediment as well. I can download it in a spreadsheet, or I can just expand it. Let's take a look at agriculture, and I'm going to look at the non-federal acres, and I can see in detail these various load sources. And again, this is why we ask that you take a look and understand these load sources before using the tool, so you'll understand what we mean when we say double cropped land. These were decisions made by the partnership, and there are official definitions. It may not match what you have in your head, so what you think of as pasture may not be what we think of as pasture, so just double check and make sure that we're all on the same page. And then you can see that in agriculture, the load drops significantly between 2013 and then what the plan is for 2025. So we can see that. You can also see the percent change. I want to point out that in most places there's a little question mark. If you hover over it, it tells you how we calculate percent change, and so that you can see how that works. Let's just expand the agriculture non-federal, and we can take a look. We can say that the grains with manure went down 30% for nitrogen, 35% for phosphorus, and a whopping 47% for sediment. That was a great reduction for grains with manure. So you can see the changes here. It's gone up some on double cropped land. That's probably not a bad thing, because you've then got more going on that land. You're going to have some winter crops that are using nutrients. So that's probably not a bad thing. Again, you're just moving some of those load sources around, but you're seeing the reduction in those that have higher loading. So that's just looking at compare scenarios for these existing scenarios, and we did it for Chemung County, New York. We could do it for any county or really any geography in the Chesapeake Bay watershed. So I did that by going to results and compare scenarios, and that was the selection I made, was for those scenarios. I want to go back to that scenarios page, because what we were looking at was the 2013 progress, which was on a 2013 land use, and it also had the 2013 BMPs. We were looking at the 2025 land use, which had the expected BMPs from a plan. I think it would make more sense to just look at and isolate the effect of the change in the land use. So let's add a new scenario. And I'm going to add this for New York, Chemung County, and I'm going to put here that this is going to be for the 2025 land use. And you can type in a description, and I'm going to put the 2013 BMPs on 2025 land, so that I hold the BMPs steady and I just see the change in loads that came from the change in land use. So I'm going to select my BMPs to be the official BMPs, and there's a definition here telling you the difference between official and planning, and I'll select my geographic scale. There are lots and lots of options: HUC 4, HUC 6, HUC 8, major basin, minor basin, basin, state, county, a modeling segment, which is a land river segment. That term is defined in our glossary. The glossary is under how-to user documentation. But I'm going to pick county. I'm going to stick with Chemung. There are a lot of counties in the Chesapeake Bay watershed, so I'm going to just use the search box to pick Chemung, move that over into my selection box using the arrow, and then I'm going to pick my base condition. We've got all of these years that are in here. This starts with 1984. Rich was saying the partnership was first created in 1983, and we started, the model period begins in 1984, and we go all the way through 2025. So I'm going to pick 2025. This is the historic trend. It is the projected condition using the historic trend methodology, and that's what I'm going to pick for this. Don't want to see the difference due to wastewater, so I'm going to pick that 2013 wastewater. I can pick my cost profile. I'm in New York, so I'll pick New York. If I wanted to, I could pick an average of the entire watershed. If I had created my own cost profile, I could have a specific one that I had done perhaps just for Chemung, and I could do that. And then I could share this scenario if I wanted to. I'm going to skip that for now, but I could share with anybody who's a user. What I want to do is copy over those 2013 BMPs so that I am isolating the effect of the change in land use and having the same BMPs. So I'm scrolling through this long list of scenarios, and I'm picking the 2013 progress. And I'm just going to copy those BMPs and click Save. And what it's doing is it's copying all of those BMPs. You can see it's editing, and then it's going to tell me that it's copied those in, and I can either edit further or I can go ahead and run it. So the bigger your scenario, the longer it takes. Generally, when you're doing a county, it's done in less than 60 seconds. I did this already and already ran it, so I've got it here. You can see this one's already done, finished editing, and it says last edits complete. And it tells you that you can go ahead and run it to get the loads, or you can go and change your BMPs or change other parameters. But I've now done what I wanted to do in terms of creating a scenario and making sure that I have the same BMPs, and I'm going to compare those results. So we did this before using the compare function. We can also do this using the report. So I'll show you what that looks like. So I want to create a report. We did this a little bit before we logged in, but we've got some more options here now that we're logged in. So that's the nice thing about logging in, is you can see more information, more options. I'm going to look at the loads here, and I'll name this loads report, Chemung County, and I'll select the geographic scale. We'll stick with county for this. And here's Chemung County. I can use the arrow, or I can double click to move it over. And I can look at these scenarios, and what I want to do is look at the loads in this scenario and take a look. And I've got different aggregations that I can pick for this loads report so that I can see what the differences are. And I want to look at perhaps all sources and look at the various agencies. It pops up to the right to tell you what this is. If I want to look at in most detailed, I would pick source agency. I can look at, oops, I scrolled too far. I can pick different ones and put them all in the same report. So I can do all sources, all agency, and submit that report. Whoops, I forgot to pick the scenarios. That's important. So I'm going to do Chemung on 2025, and I'm also going to do that 2013 progress. So I've got those two in there. And I click Submit Report. It says my report was submitted, and I will receive an email when it is complete. I can receive that email, and I can download the report from my email, but I can also just as easily go to this other tab that says Download Reports and see if it's here. And it's working on it. I've also done it in advance. It's kind of like a cooking show where they've got things prepared as you go along. So I've already cooked that rack of lamb, and I'm going to download this report here. So let's open that one where we've got the Chemung loads. It's got a README. It has the scenario details. So I've got my details here, make sure I did everything correctly. It's always good to check and say, what were my base conditions? Should they be the same or should they be different? That's exactly what I'm comparing are the base conditions. They are different. That's what I want. And then looking at the description, and I have different cost profiles, but I'm not focused on the cost, so it's okay. And then we have here this detail. This is a lot of detail. We've got all of these various load sources, whether it's a load allocation or a waste load allocation. That's important for people working on the TMDL. They'll need to know that. And we've got the acres, or in the case of something like riparian pasture deposition, it's not measured in acres, that's a direct load. And we've got septic, that's measured in systems. So you can see that these are done, the unit is different. And this amount refers to this unit. So we've got this 2013 progress, and you can see the difference if there's a difference in acres. And then we can see what the difference in nitrogen loads is. So if I'm looking at the nitrogen load, I can see that for something like MS4 turf grass, the municipal separate stormwater and sewer, that is turf grass, that the load is going up between 2013 and 2025. And that is not due to the BMPs. Instead, that is due to the change in load sources. So it is likely that that is a difference in acres. It is. So I have an increase in acres for that load source, so it makes sense that that load is going up. So you could just look at the difference in acres, you could look at the loads, you could see what the impact is. I'm going to scroll up here and we'll take a look at an agricultural one. And you can see here we've got the grains with manure. We can see that the acres are going down and the loads, in fact, are going down too. If you wanted to see the pounds per acre or a loading rate, that would be easy to do. You simply divide the load by the acres and you can have that loading rate. It will be the same, but sometimes that's a more useful way to look at it. So this was the detail. I've got a lot of tabs in this spreadsheet because I selected these different aggregations. If I wanted to sum it all up and get rid of the detail, I can do that. I put all sources, all agencies. It's summed up to the all. It's all put together, all summed. So all means it's all together. And I've got it here, and I can see the amount for everything, and I can compare that nitrogen load and see what it's doing across the board. So while on the other sheet we saw the detail and we saw some going up, some going down, we can see that across the board, looking at all of the different load sources or land uses, we can see that the change is actually going down in Chemung County. And we had another one in here where we could see the various agencies, and if we wanted to look at, say, just Department of Defense, we can filter this spreadsheet. They don't have agriculture. That makes sense to me. They do have a few acres of buildings. They do have, a few more acres of turf grass. And we can look at this for each load source just for Department of Defense or just for the non-federal acres or something else. So we've got those options here. And that was from a report that we created and downloaded. So that helps us see the difference, the impact in land use development over time. And we did that for a county, but again, we could do it for the whole watershed. We can do it for various scales. CAST can also be used to answer questions about the effect of different BMPs on loads. But before I go and talk about the various BMPs, and to do that, we'll go back to the scenarios page. I'm going to pause and take a look at some of the questions that have come in while I've been talking. So let me just take a look at some of these. I'm going to address the fact that the CAST does tap into the full capabilities of the Chesapeake Bay watershed model. They are one and the same. In this Phase 6 version, the watershed model is calibrated. Once it is calibrated, then whenever you run a scenario on CAST, you are running it on the watershed model. CAST is just the name we use for the online interface, but it is exactly the same. So it is one and the same. When you're running a scenario in CAST, it is running it on the watershed model. Another question was about what is the level of modeling expertise required to use CAST. We have designed it so that you really don't have to have a background in modeling. You don't have to know how hydrologic models work. that is something that you can find out more about on the CAST homepage. There's a ton of documentation. But if you want to run it because you're a county planner, you have no modeling experience, that's what this is for. This is meant to help people who are doing plans and who are in charge of programs to do implementation to figure out what to do, when to do it, where to do it. It's not really meant for modelers. Although modelers use the tool, we really want to make sure that it is accessible to planners first and foremost, because that is where the implementation is going to happen, is at that local level of planning. So if you're a modeler, that's great. You're going to really understand what happens under the hood, and the information is there to understand it. It's explained. But if you're not a modeler, the tool should be fine for you to use because we've had you in mind when developing the tool. Another question is about what scale is CAST best suited for. It is all set up so that you can work at a HUC scale to a county scale to the entire state or Chesapeake Bay Watershed, or you could do the entire, James River Basin that Rich was showing you earlier. Any of those work. I don't think there's a scale that CAST is best suited for unless you're talking about animals. If you're working on something related to animals, our source data comes in at the county scale, in which case you might want to stick to county or an aggregation of a county like a state. But otherwise, I think that you can use any of those scales. And another question was about how citizens can use CAST to influence local policy. In answering questions about land use change over time, and answering questions about which BMPs to use or where to put BMPs, citizens can gain information about what is the most efficient approach, what is the most cost-effective approach, and then what is the impact on those co-benefits. How can we focus on brook trout? How can we focus on recreation? How can we focus on biodiversity? That kind of information can be used to influence local policy. The tool is meant to provide the data that would underlie local policy. So it's not directly a policy tool, but it provides information to inform policy. In terms of other models that are available outside of the Chesapeake Bay watershed, I don't know of other tools that are similar to CAST and that work at the detail and have all of the components. I haven't seen any. Maybe some of the people in the webinar might have some other comments on that, but I'm not personally aware of any. And then I think that we've got the CAST working for nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment, and that's because the watershed model that was used, that was calibrated and provides the information, and it is the same model, is for nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment. We do not include bacteria. I know there are a lot of local TMDLs for bacteria. There are ways to maybe make some assumptions that bacteria is coming from manure or from certain areas, types of land use, but it is not modeled directly. We do have stormwater BMPs in the model, and we're going to show you more about that. For manufactured stormwater BMPs, I think you're probably best off using, some stormwater performance standards, and we do have those in there. There are going to be other manufactured stormwater BMPs that are added. There is a whole protocol for evaluating various practices like manufactured stormwater BMPs, and the partnership works to come up with the best way to evaluate the effect of those and how those are modeled. The information is from the states in the partnership and from all kinds of various sources of information, and it is QA/QC'd by the Chesapeake Bay program staff and the entire partnership, and really the public, because the public has access to all of this information, and it has been a very public process to have people respond to what we're using, how we're using it, what makes sense, and to have all of this information reviewed. So that is how we make sure that it's all QA/QC'd. The load reduction estimates are in there. Some of y'all work on trading, nutrient or sediment trading, and I know that when you're in a trading program, there are uncertainty ratios and other things that are applied. Those are not applied in this tool. This tool provides you simply the pounds of nitrogen, phosphorus, or sediment reduced. Any uncertainty estimates that you'd like to include would have to be done on top of what we provide here. And then the list of BMPs did come from the Chesapeake Bay Program work groups. I'm just scrolling through these questions and answering them as I see them. So I know this seems a little disjoint, but I am trying to take care of these questions as we go along. So I think I've caught up on most of the questions to this point. Let me move on to talk about the effect of BMPs, and hopefully that'll help answer some additional questions about how this is done. So if we want to take a look at BMPs, one of the first questions we're probably going to ask is about cost. How much money are we spending? What is the cost of one BMP versus another? I mentioned that we have cost data in here, and I want to go to the cost profiles. I'm at the top menu bar, and so I clicked on cost profiles. I have here these official scenarios that were created, one for each state, and then an average for the entire watershed. And these are cost profiles. You can also create one for yourself. So let's look at that. You can download the information and look at it, but let's add a new cost profile. I'm going to add a cost profile, and I'm going to name this New York adjusted, and it'll be an adjustment of from the shared cost profile for New York. And it may be that the averages are not something I agree with. It may be that I'm doing this in Chemung County and the prices are a little bit different there. So that's fine. This is just meant to be a starting point. These costs are meant to be a starting point. I can share this. I could share this cost profile with Rich, and so he could take a look, and we could collaborate together. Let me pick the right Rich here, so someone isn't confused about why I'm sharing with them. And so I'm sharing this with Rich Batiuk, and he can see this one that I've created. Now I've created it. My next step is to edit this. So you can see what I've picked here, and I'm going to go to developed BMPs. And there's a list here of all these developed BMPs. And these are the BMPs that go on our developed load sources. You know, we used to call this urban, and we've transitioned to using the term developed. And the reason is that there is developed land that is in primarily agricultural areas, in rural areas. So if you've got that Walmart in a rural area, that is developed land. That Walmart has a lot of impervious surfaces. So we call it developed so that there's no confusion about the fact that it's developed land, whether or not it's in an urban or rural area. So we've got here a list of all of these BMPs. And you'll see here that we've got, and I'm scrolling down through this list, so you can see some other ones in here. So we've got a number of different ones, like nutrient management plans for high-risk lawns, low-risk lawns. We've got permeable pavement. We have a number of different options in here for forest buffers and grass buffers. So I'm just going to, scroll down and show you that there are so many different ones in here that you can choose from. And each of these have a cost associated with them. And again, this is meant to be a starting point. So if I'm just looking at street sweeping, advanced sweeping technology, 2 passes per week, the estimated lifespan for that is 8 years, and that has to do with the technology that is used for the street sweeping. And there's a capital cost. So buying that street sweeper is estimated to be about $3,000. Now I may say, oh, we can get a deal. We can get that street sweeper for $2,500, and I can make that change. And then for O&M, operations and maintenance, that cost is for, the gasoline, whatever it takes to maintain that street sweeper. And perhaps it's a little bit less expensive in Chemung County, so I can put in $2,000. And then there would be an opportunity cost, which is not going to apply to a street sweeper, but if you were doing something like a forest buffer, then that would take up land that otherwise could be farmed or otherwise could be developed into, new housing or something. And there's information that pops up when you look at the top here. So I've made these changes. They're highlighted in red. And if I save them, that total annualized cost also changes. And I could go through and do this for any number of BMPs. And if I have questions about this, I can click on the View Documentation, and it pops up into the part about cost profiles. And I can scroll through here and get all kinds of information. Of particular importance, because I know there's some economists on the webinar, of particular importance will be what is the formula that was used for this. And you can see here, this is the formula that was used. And so there's a 5% annualization rate. So you can get detailed information in here. And there are also FAQs. And this is under any of these sections. You can get FAQs about what's going on. We update this documentation regularly based on the questions that come in. So when you hit contact us, it sends an email to the Bay program and those questions get asked. When you get more than 1 or 2 questions that are similar or the same, then that information definitely goes into the documentation so that everybody can see those questions, answers, get better information. So when you're using the tool, don't be scared to click on View Documentation and take a look at that information. Anyway, I've adjusted this, this developed BMPs. I could go through and do the same for agricultural BMPs or for septics or natural. It may be that I can do something like non-urban stream restoration more or less expensively, in which case I would make changes and make these adjustments here for New York. So I've made those changes. I've got that in my cost profile. I've saved that. And I can go back and make sure that, yes, I've got it listed here. It's New York adjusted. Tells me when I last modified that cost profile. Sometimes when I do cost, I will go through and do it just for redevelopment or just for new development. What we have here for the developed BMPs is an average cost, not knowing whether it's in redevelopment or new development. And here's an example of where I created a scenario for, in this case, Montgomery County, where it was for redevelopment, where the costs are a bit higher than for new development. So that was one that I worked on recently. So you've got a lot of different options for how to use costs. Let's go back to scenarios. We were talking about how we can use CAST to answer questions about the effect of different BMPs on loads. I've shown you how you can create the cost because we want to consider that. This is multi-objective planning. So we've got our objective of looking at load, looking at cost, as well as looking at those co-benefits. Let's go in here and look at a scenario where we can look at the impact of a filter for buffers. So I'm going to add a new scenario, and I'm going to name this scenario something like Chemung more buffers, and I'm going to add more buffers, and I can compare this to the 2013 progress. And so I put a little note to remind myself. And since I'm doing that, one of the things I can do, I just can copy everything from that 2013 progress to save you the steps. So it's like online shopping. It's got autofill for you. You don't have to make that selection. So I just pick that, and I hit copy, and it populates it for me. So I'm going to go back and put this as more buffers, and I'll change this name and do more buffers. And so it copied everything for me, but I need to specify that I'm doing Chemung County. I like starting at the top of the watershed. So this is already populated, and I could add more notes. I could share this with other folks. I need to add my BMPs, and I'm going to just copy in the BMPs from that 2013 progress. And I selected that, it's highlighted in blue, and I just pick Save. And so now it's going to verify that everything I did is correct. And I actually did this already, but I'll show you, it's the editing is finished. It's checked that I copied everything in properly. And I'm going to add more buffers. So this is what I just created under the scenario metadata. Gives me a chance to double check. There are other ways to add BMPs you could upload as well. The video goes into detail about that. I think it's one of our longer videos, meaning it's 3 minutes. So I hope you have the 3 minutes to spend to figure that out. The next tab is invalid BMPs. There's nothing invalid. I copied it already. I know there's nothing invalid, but I recommend you check. I can see that in New York they already have a record in 2013 of the Department of Defense having wet ponds. Go Department of Defense. That's great. You've already got stuff in here. But let me skip to the agricultural tab. Now I can expand here and say, what's going on here? Where are most of my acres? Wow, we've got a lot of acres in hay and in pasture in Chemung County. I've been there. That's what I've observed. So that gives me confidence that, yes, this is what I've seen. This gives me the good confidence that the land use that we're using is accurate. So I like that. I can also see here that we've got a lot of other leguminous hay. That's important, especially in New York where you get those hay mixtures. And then, there's a lot of ag open space. There is some grains in here, not so much as many soybeans, but it's there. And you can see, not so much specialty crop. That would be your vegetables and fruits. Anyway, so we can see the land use. That gives us some clues about what we want to do. But I want to add some buffers. Let me just use the filter here and see what we've already got for buffer. So I'm going to search just for BUFF, and I can see we've got 4 records here for cropland and hay, and they're all for 0.8 acres. That's not very many acres, but we can see what's already here. I've got a couple of options. I can go in here and say, let me increase this so that I can see the impact of the buffers, and I could say, well, it's 0.8. Let me just go ahead and change that to 50 acres, and that's on crop and hay, and it's on Chemung County, and I can click Save. So now we've got 50 buffers instead of the 0.8 for that record, and we'll also have, it'll be 50 plus this 0.8 for a total, but we have multiple records, and that probably has to do with the way that New York collected the information, and that they had multiple records for perhaps different farms, for perhaps different parts of that county. I'm not sure exactly how they did it, but that, that's fine that you can have multiple records, but when it's calculated, it's just going to sum it all up for the same BMP. I can also do it another way by clicking the Add BMP button, selecting the county, Chemung County, and I can select the BMP, and if I do that, I can go down and see, well, what are my buffers? And I scrolled too fast, and I could do it for the stream side. That would be alongside the pasture, or I could look at these upland buffers, and I've got options. It's always good to have options. I like options. We've got forest buffer, we have grass buffer, we have narrow forest and grass buffers, and again, the definition that the Bay Program Partnership has come up with may not match the one that you've used for other projects or that you have in your head. So it's always good to take a look at those definitions. You can do it all at once in the source data, or you can hover over the BMP name and you can read the definition that comes up. I can see here that a buffer that's narrow is defined as between 10 and 35 feet. One that's not narrow shows that the recommended buffer width is 100, but it could be as narrow as 35 feet. That's because we like to put fences in a straight line, and streams don't necessarily want to go in a straight line. So we're going to have a varying width of our buffer. But if I pick forest buffer, and I want to put that on crop and hay, there were different options there, but I picked crop and hay. And I can select my unit of acres or percent. Sometimes when you're doing a plan, you want to be a little general. And I could say, what if I do it at, say, buffers on 5% of the land or 3% or something like that. That's an option, and that gives you a general idea. Or you can be much more specific and pick the acres. And I could put in here that I'm going to put it on my 50 acres and click Save. And I did it, and it's here. Now remember, we already edited this record to put it on 50, so now I put it in here twice. I don't want to do that, so I'm going to delete the record I just added. And I can see that the one I put in at 50 when I did the editing is there. So you can add BMPs multiple ways. I copied the 2013 BMPs in, and then I went in there and I added a BMP using this little box, or I can edit the BMP. You can also upload BMPs from a table, and you can watch the 3-minute video that shows you how to do that. So I've made this change. The next thing I want to do is go back to the scenarios page. I added that BMP, it's saved. I don't need to do anything else. I can go back to scenarios and say, okay, I added that New York Chemung County forest buffer, more buffer example. What I want to do now is compare the load so I can see what was the impact of that forest buffer. So I'm going to go And I've got options here. We did a report, that was that Excel spreadsheet. We did compare scenarios where it showed us the difference in load, the cost, and it even calculated the percent change for you. But let's take a look at the graph so I can show off these pretty graphs that you can look at. If you're running late for a meeting and you got to show some data, you can just use this graph and copy it quickly into a presentation and look very prepared. So it's a shortcut for yourself. I'm picking New York. I'm picking Chemung County again. I'm going to pick all agencies, but again, if I worked for the Navy, I might want to pick just Department of Defense. Maybe Navy is not the best example in Chemung County, but if I worked for, let's say, Army, that might be more appropriate. But I'm going to stick with all agencies. And then let's select our baseline, which was 2013 progress. And these are all allocation air, but if I had different kinds of atmospheric deposition, I would want to make sure that they match. And then we added that more buffer scenario. So let me take a look and see. Here it is, Chemung more buffers. And I just click graph. And I could do 3 or 4 scenarios, but we're going to stick to just these 2. Let me isolate nitrogen. This is a key up here. We've got nitrogen and phosphorus in the same graph. I like to look at it just one at a time. So I can focus on one thing at a time. I added more buffers. I went from 2,000, almost 2,300 pounds down to 2,200 pounds. So I had quite a bit of savings from adding my 50 acres of buffers. That's good. I'm happy about that. Now, this is what happens at the edge of a small stream. I want to know what gets delivered to the Chesapeake Bay, so I can look at the edge of tide. So we have, a tiny amount that goes all the way from Chemung County, New York, down to the whole Chesapeake Bay. So for all those sailors on the bay, we can see that they're only going to get 89,000 pounds in the bay, which is a reduction, and you can see that in the graph that you get this reduction. And it will rescale, so you can see as you go what the change in scale is. So that was nitrogen. Let me get rid of nitrogen and take a look at the phosphorus at the edge of a stream. And again, you can see it rescaled over here. So we've got edge of stream went from 328 pounds of phosphorus down to 314. So that's a reduction from those 50 acres of buffers. Now I need to know what my goal is. It may be that that I've been given a local area goal that New York Department of Environmental Conservation gave me a goal and said in Chemung County you've got to reduce a certain amount of nitrogen or phosphorus. And so I would just say, okay, what did I need to reduce? Have I met that reduction? So I can see that information here. And likewise for sediment, for edge of stream, and also for the edge of tide. It's so tiny that you can't see it down there for the edge of tide, but we do have all that information available. And if you want to print this, it's like printing anything else. I can print this to my printer, or I could print it to a PDF and paste it in my PowerPoint. So that meeting I'm late for, where I was supposed to have a presentation, I can do this in about 5 minutes and be prepared. So we're here to serve, we're here to help. So you can see your loads. And then we can also show you the sources. So what you see here are pie charts. Now, a pie chart is a funny thing. A pie chart is always round. A pie chart is always going to be the same size because it's always a percent. So even though I have a lower load in my more buffer scenario, the size of the circle is the same, but that doesn't mean that the total load isn't. What I can see here, instead of seeing the change in load, which I saw on the previous page, the loads page, I can see the change in sources. So we put those buffers on agriculture. What happened? We can see our agriculture load when I hover over it. We can see the percent was 23, almost 24%. Now agriculture is only making up 21.5%. That's good. The load for agriculture has decreased with our buffers. The load overall has decreased, which we saw from our bar chart, and we can see what's going on there. So that means that the other sectors didn't have an increase in load. Instead, they are now accounting for more of the load as agriculture has decreased. We've got this for nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment. So when you hover over it, you get the pounds. When you don't hover over it, you can see the percents. If you just hover over the key, it just highlights it a little bit different so you can remember what's purple. That should be helpful for people who might be colorblind. So that's what we can do when we just want to see the impact of a change in a BMP. We can do that for lots of BMPs at the same time. We can do it one at a time. So CAST can answer these types of questions. There are a lot of other things that we can do in terms of geographic targeting. I could look at various scenarios and download reports where I look at, if I put that BMP in, let me move to the state of Delaware. If I put that BMP in Newcastle versus Kent County in Delaware, what would be the impact in loads? Is it better for me to do it in Newcastle, or is it better for me to do it in Kent? I can do that by putting 50 acres of a buffer in Newcastle and 50 acres of a buffer in Kent, and then doing a report and looking at those two counties and seeing where was my reduction greater. So I'll know where I should target. Another thing you need to know when you target is where is the load highest to begin with. You need to look at the monitoring data. You can also look at the model data, but a little bit more investigation to get a good understanding is helpful when you look at where to geographically target. We are getting close to the end, and I know a lot of questions have come in, so I want to take a moment to read through some more of these questions. So let's take a look at these, and some of these may also be for Rich. So I'm taking a look, and it is, in terms of the parcel scale, CAST is not designed for a site-specific, looking at a new development of, 50 houses, or looking at a farm field. Is not designed for that scale of modeling. So that would be another tool that the Bay program develops called BayFast. BayFast is designed for parcel scale modeling, but CAST is designed for something that's slightly larger than that. Someone is asking, what is the level of effort for developing the tool for other watersheds? Certainly that can be done, but, building the tool doesn't mean that the data populates. So, doing the web interface, doing the calculations that happen in the background, all of that can be done, but you have to have some sort of underlying model that tells you what the loads are with different BMPs. And if you're looking at progress from year to year with different BMPs, building the tool doesn't mean that you've got all that information on what the BMPs. The Bay program is so privileged to have had this 30-year history of states supporting the implementation of all these BMPs. So building the tool didn't create that data. Building the tool made that data transparent. So the level of effort to build a tool like this is something that would have to be done, but you have to make sure you have the data first. So that would be a model that tells you what the loads are, and also looking at the reporting for what the BMPs are. There's a question about Virginia focusing on implementation plans on bacteria. I'll defer to Rich. I don't believe bacteria is directly a management strategy that would have a co-benefit calculated on that one.
Yeah, not yet at this point. We did have the Partnership Scientific and Technical Advisory Committee last March had a workshop looking at co-benefits, and we were looking across the country and around the world of where folks have looked at co-benefits, where they've been able to make a numeric connection between those two. The bacteria, there are certainly models out there. That's something that the partnership hasn't focused as much on human health because of our state and local partners have been dealing with that particular issue, but a lot of interest in bacteria from a modeling and co-benefits. So we haven't quite gotten to there yet, but that's going to be on our list probably for next year to try to bring that information in there. But as Olivia mentioned, our modeling structure in the Phase 6 model does in fact focus on bacteria, but it does a lot of emphasis on hydrology, groundwater, as well as stream and surface flow, as well as on the nutrient parameters. There's no reason that other partners, it's an open source model and something that, again, that the partnership has published, not only the code, but all the documentation out there. Other partners can take that and add other parameters that they'd like to see, and then likely then, we could help build additional benefits within the section that Olivia described on there as well.
Yeah, I know Delaware came up with a crosswalk for BMPs that impact manure, because in Delaware the primary source of bacteria is manure, and what the impact would be on bacteria, and that was a pretty good crosswalk, and is something that could be used. but it is not incorporated into CAST. I believe there was some work in Virginia along the same lines. But yeah, it takes a little bit more effort to get it incorporated into CAST and be watershed-wide. Someone is asking how long a run takes. If you're doing a Chesapeake Bay watershed scenario for the entire watershed, all 64,000 square miles, that's a lot more data. It will take a little bit longer. It could take a couple of minutes. But if you're doing it for just a county, like I've shown today, they're done in it's done in less than 60 seconds. Frequently, it's done, before 2 seconds are up. So it depends on the size of the scenario, which means that how much data is being calculated. We actually have a release coming, a new release coming at the end of today. So once we get through this webinar, we're going to take CAST offline for a little bit and make some upgrades, and things will get even faster than they are now. So it will speed up, but it is still, a couple of minutes compared to years ago when we'd run the watershed model and it would be a couple of weeks to get everything done. So we think it's pretty fast, but as an online tool, you do get an email when your reports are done and when your run is done, that information is showing. So we created a couple of scenarios. You can run these at the same time. It is designed to work with several things running at the same time. So these can happen simultaneously. Another question came up about using CAST to set a load reduction target and how much land would need to be treated by a specific BMP type. So a load reduction target is something that is worked out depending on some policy decisions. So that's a little bit separate. Those reduction targets are being worked out in the context of the Chesapeake Bay TMDL as part of the midpoint assessment, and that is information we will make available in CAST. Determining how much land needs to be treated by a specific BMP type is absolutely a question that CAST answers. You can say, my load reduction target is, and I'm making it up, say 10%, then you can put in there a buffer, and I'm picking on buffers as my example today, but you can put in any number of BMPs and see what the load reductions are, and if you hit that 10%, you would go under results and go to compare scenarios, and it would even tell you if you've hit 10%. If your target or your goal is given to you in terms of a pounds reduced, you simply need to know how to subtract, and you can figure that out by also looking at compare scenarios. And if you're just given your goal in terms of total pounds that are allowed, then you can certainly just look at the number that is on the screen or download it in a table. Another question came up about which watershed model this is based on. We moved to multiple models, as Rich put in his presentation, and some of the examples in the question were HSPF and Sparrow, yes and yes. So it is multiple models. We have many in here. We also have Apple, which is for phosphorus modeling in soils. That's in here, and the more information on that is on the home page. And if you go to model documentation, we've got an overview, which would be a good place to start, and then all kinds of more information that gets into more detail about the models. And there are recorded webinars that are in the past, and if you click on this, you can watch those webinars and find out more about those questions. But again, CAST is meant to be used by planners who do not need to know all of the underlying technical details. So while the information is available, and we have it here, you don't have to know it. But this is where you would go to find out that information. Another question came up about where users can find the change in the water balance when BMPs are added. So we're not looking at a water balance in terms of runoff. We're using an average runoff. So that's not information that's going to be in this model. We are showing the loads for nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment. We show the costs. We are not showing the change in stream loads. We are using an average hydrology. That's how scenarios work. Are there other questions? I know we're getting close to the end of time, Miranda. It might be time for me to turn it back over to you and see if there are other questions and other information you want to finish up with.
Sure thing. Thank you so much, Olivia and Rich. I definitely have a few announcements before we go. So we're going to toggle through the last few slides to ensure you see all of the information. Once again, if your question was not answered today or you would like to get some information from our speakers, you can find their contact information on this slide. And we are currently planning our next webcast scheduled for late January and hope that you will visit our website in the coming weeks as we post additional details on the topic, speakers, how to register, etc. So check back with us at www.epa.gov/Watershed Academy for more details. And also, before you go, please don't forget to download the certificate. This certificate can be downloaded from the EPA server through the link on this slide. Please type this link into your web browser to download a PDF document, and you can personalize it with the names of everyone watching from your location. Finally, when the webcast is over, an evaluation survey will be shown on your computer screen, and we encourage you to answer the evaluation and give us feedback, as we always try to incorporate the feedback and improve our webcast. So we have a few more minutes if there are any other final questions. Otherwise, well, I'll leave it there to see if there's anything that comes through. Nope. All right. So I guess the webcast is over. Thank you again. I would like to say our speakers were amazing, and thank you to everyone who joined us. And have a good rest of your Thursday.